Hi! Today we're going to talk about photosynthesis, just in general, so we can have like an overview of the process before we do it in detail, which is our next two objectives. So today we're going to talk about chloroplasts, high energy electrons, and then the equation for photosynthesis, the inputs and outputs. So everything today is like a high level overview. Let's start with chloroplasts. The chloroplast is the organelle inside of the plant that's responsible for photosynthesis. So I'm going to be cliche, and I'm going to pick a green pen so that we can draw this. Actually, I'm going to start off by drawing a plant cell. Plant cells are square. It has a cell wall and a cell membrane. It has a large structure inside of it that's the nucleus. And then artists draw chloroplasts in lots of different ways, but they're like small discs, and they have like little things inside of them. So, now we are going to do a zoom out of one of these chloroplasts so we can take a closer look at it. So, take this out, and then I'm going to draw one gigantic chloroplast. Chloroplasts have two membranes, an outer membrane and an inner membrane. And this membrane, it's just like the cell membrane that we're used to, except of it being a cell membrane, it's the chloroplast membrane. So let's label this as the outer membrane, and this is the inner membrane. And then all of this empty space in here are full of discs called thylakoids. So like that is one thylakoid, but then they always occur in a whole stack. They kind of look like a stack of pancakes, or maybe like those like chips you use when you're playing poker, something like that. So one circle all by itself is called a thylakoid. Thylakoid. One disc, one pancake. If you were talking about all of them as a stack, that's called a granum. So a granum would be a stack of thylakoids. And then there's something super important located in the thylakoid membrane, like embedded in the membrane. It's right there. I'm using my cool star pen. That's where the pigment lives. And the most common plant pigment is chlorophyll. So it's literally just embedded in the membrane. See if I can label that for us. Can you read the star pen? Chlorophyll. Sorry, that's kind of hard to read. I'll fix it. Chlorophyll. Some plants do contain other pigments, but the most common one is chlorophyll. In our activity for this objective, we're going to take a closer look at plant pigments. And there they are, literally inside of this membrane. One more thing, this is a 3D structure, so like all of it is full. So this space, like in between all the granum, is filled with a liquid. It's kind of like the cytoplasm, so it's like a jelly-like, water-like liquid, but it's called the stroma. Yeah. I'm gonna erase this now. Yay! Sometimes it doesn't work when I try to do that like circle erase thing, but I'm glad that it worked this time. And now, let's take a look at this picture. Hopefully this looks familiar to you. This is what we just tried to draw. So we can see our green outer membrane, our red inner membrane. Here is one thylakoid, and then if we're talking about this whole stack, we would call it a granum. And their stroma is fancy. Like, look, it has like these like little like glistening crystal things inside of it. So it's okay for us to draw things differently as long as we know what we're trying to represent. And here is a zoom out into the thylakoid membrane. You might recognize our little lipid friends, the phospholipid bilayer in the cell membrane, the glycerol plus the fatty acid chain. So that's a generic cell membrane. And then these proteins are like clusters of pigment molecules. So they're called photosystems, but a photosystem is like a whole bunch of pigment molecules stuck together. So that's where we would find the chlorophyll. I want to ask you what questions you have, so if you have questions, please email me. I want to answer them. And then next, we need to talk about something called high energy electrons. High energy electrons. Photosynthesis works because of energy. Like when the sunlight strikes the plant, it gets the sun's energy. But the plant needs somewhere to put that energy, so it needs something called an electron carrier. And in photosynthesis, the name of the electron carrier is NADP+. That stands for something, but we don't care what it stands for. We're always just going to call it NAD+. And I like to draw it just like an empty box. So like right now, this box is empty. It doesn't have any electrons in it. So this is kind of like the low energy state. So we could even make an analogy with ADP being the low energy one. And then, when sunlight strikes the plant and it excites the electrons, this box actually fills up with electrons and it gets a name change. It's called NADPH, and it has 2 electrons inside of it. And then this would be our high energy form. And maybe it kind of reminds you of ATP. I like comparing it to ATP and ADP because the same cycle happens. You can have NADP+, and then when the sun energizes the electrons, it becomes NADPH, and then NADPH can get rid of its electrons, and it goes back to being that empty box version ready to be filled up again. So it's recycled over and over and over and over. And again, like, pause the video, think about it, email me your questions. I want to know what you're thinking. And the last thing that I want us to talk about today is just a generic overview of photosynthesis. So starting off, let's try to come up with the equation for photosynthesis. And I like to think about, what does a plant need to keep it alive? I know that I have to water my plant, so water has to be in the equation. And then, you know how humans exhale oxygen? Or oops, that's not true. Humans inhale oxygen and humans exhale carbon dioxide. Plants take in that carbon dioxide that we exhale. That's why, like, if you sing to your plant, it can actually help it grow, possibly. Well, it's true that plants need water and carbon dioxide. And if you give a plant water and carbon dioxide, it's able to make the sugar glucose. And then plants also release oxygen, which is where us animals get the oxygen that we breathe in. And let's add the chemical formulas for those. So water is H2O, carbon dioxide is CO2, glucose is C6H12O6, and oxygen is O2. The equation is okay, but it has a problem. You may have noticed that it's not balanced. That means that the number of atoms on both sides of the equation isn't the same. So we need to add in coefficients to make it the same. I didn't add a coefficient in front of glucose because we only need 1 glucose, and the 1 is like understood there. Okay. And now I want to take our thing. Oops, that was not what I was trying to do. I wanted to see if I could like select our equation and then shrink it, but it looks like that's, ooh, there we go. Okay, nope. I'm just gonna erase this and then we'll draw it back for this one. So I want to draw a chloroplast, and I just want to add the inputs and outputs to it to finish off our discussion. So go ahead and draw a chloroplast like pretty big, like it can be like the size of your page. And remember, it has that inner and outer membrane. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw some granum. And then remember how the rest of the chloroplast is filled up with stroma. So I'm just going to leave this whole part over here like empty because all of this is stroma. All right. Now, what were our inputs for photosynthesis? What does the plant need to stay alive? I know that it needs water. That's going to be used in the thylakoid. Oh, and we didn't put this in our equation earlier, but we should have. Plants also need sunlight to be able to stay alive. And then plants need carbon dioxide, and that is used down here in part 2 of the reaction. So that's going to go into the stroma. And then what came out of our photosynthesis equation? Plants release oxygen that humans breathe into the air, and plants produce the sugar glucose. Doesn't that sound weird? Like when you're eating broccoli or when you're eating celery, you're actually eating sugar. Sugar doesn't mean sweet, sugar just means it's a carbohydrate. And what powers this reaction? I'm gonna go ahead and add this like little cycle symbol right here that represents what's happening in step 2. And then I'm gonna get us a new color because ATP is powering this reaction. So the purpose of step 1 is to make ATP and those high energy electrons, NADPH, and then they go into step 2 and they're used to produce the sugar. And then what comes back out is that low energy form, ADP, and NAD+. Those go back into the thylakoid, they get re-energized by the sunlight, and they come back out the other side to be able to keep making more glucose. Let's label our terms. So photosynthesis has like 2 main steps. Step 1, which we drew over here, is called the light-dependent reactions. I'm trying to erase that. All right. Step 1 is the light-dependent reactions. Light-dependent means that it needs light. So if a plant was in the dark, it would not be able to do this reaction. That's why most plants die when they're kept in the dark. And then step number 2 is the light-independent reactions. So independent, it means like free of. So this one doesn't need light to be able to occur. The light-independent reactions were discovered by a guy named Melvin Calvin. So sometimes people call this the Calvin cycle. And that's it. If you feel confused and overwhelmed, don't worry. This is confusing and overwhelming, and I promise we're going to keep going over it until it starts to make more sense. Thank you.